Food is primarily the fuel of the human body. It is key to human sustenance. For some people, it has come to mean more: a foundation for health, a means of cultural identity, and even social connection. But for many people, food is a problem. A problem because they don't have it and they face acute hunger. In Nigeria, millions are said to be on this list, and it has earned Nigeria a label as a hunger hotspot. According to a recent report by the World Food Programme, 31.8 million Nigerians faced acute food insecurity in 2024. What is responsible for this perception, and what must be done to address this painfully huge figure? Tonight, we speak with David Stevenson, the Nigeria Country Director, World Food Programme. Hello, and thank you for having us in your office.
Happy to be here, Lonray.
A pleasure. Now, I think I would like us to go straight into it. Can you tell us about the work your program does?
Sure. We're the World Food Programme based here in Nigeria. We arrived in 2015 as a response to the government request, and also our board members as a United Nations agency. Given the challenges in the northeast of the country primarily, so Boko Haram, ISWAP, conflict-related displacement, and malnutrition rates spiking at the time. So I arrived here about 2.5 years ago as country director, and we've been working flat out with government partners at the federal level, at the state level, at the local government level, but also with the private sector, and within the UN system and the donor community, responding to the needs in the Northeast, the needs of food assistance, and also setting up a business-oriented approach, purchasing food locally and moving it with local transporters to the sites, which helps the local agricultural economy. As well as doing a cash transfer and voucher program where we employ about 365 Nigerian small-scale retailers to source food, to bring it to the distribution sites, and then meet the needs of hungry people in that way. So it's a combined approach of meeting the humanitarian food assistance needs, but at the same time helping with the agricultural economy, and as quickly as possible, increasing the impact we can make on self-reliance, on solutions for people getting back to their agricultural livelihoods. It's expanded now from the Northeast across the northern states into the Northwest, where there is also displacement and conflict-related hunger, not Boko Haram and ISWAP, but farmer-herder conflict and banditry. And in the last couple of years, we've also been responding to the very, very high food inflation following the inauguration and the reform program announced by the government. Food prices spiked 200% to 300%, pricing low-income people out of the market, and that has increased the demand for our services in terms of assisting with food assistance, but also advising on zero hunger initiatives across the country.
But your work right now appears, from what you've explained, to primarily look at northern Nigeria. Do you also consider situations in the southern part?
So the food assistance program, in terms of meeting the needs of hungry Nigerians, yes, is primarily focused in the north. Okay. That was the request of government in us arriving in the country, and we maintained focus in that part of the area as had been approved by our executive board. But we're very much assisting as much as we can with policy advice and technical assistance across the country as the government and the people of Nigeria are increasingly addressing the needs of people. We call it a zero hunger movement that's needed throughout the country, given the very high food inflation and the need to increase both access and availability of food on the market.
Okay, now, but if you look at Nigeria right now, I'll still go back to your report, and I hope this dives into that.
Yeah.
What would you say has been, what's the situation on ground? If I can put it that way.
So the report you're referring to is a global food needs report.
Okay.
That was released by World Food Program, by FAO, by the European Union, by a number of countries across the world, indicating those countries with the highest priority needs in terms of hunger hotspots. And Nigeria is the first country mentioned in the global report, and that's because Nigeria, along with Myanmar and Sudan, are the three countries where the number that increased in terms of food insecurity was the highest in 2024, for the reasons I mentioned earlier on Nigeria. It's also noted in the report that the number of children malnourished in the country, over 5 million now, is the highest number globally of those countries assist. So it really points out some of the challenges we have here. Let's take note that Nigeria is also the most populous country in Africa. And in that sense, there's the most potential really for either high malnourishment or the progress that's needed to reduce malnutrition, to increase nutrition status through increasing agricultural economic activity. Now, 300 million globally, food insecure, 52 million in West Africa. Out of the 52 million, 31 million in Nigeria. That's an increase of about 6 million over the last year. So the trend has not been going in the right direction. However, food prices have stabilized. That's good news. They haven't returned to pre-reform levels, but they have stabilized. And we certainly see an opportunity to build back the breadbasket in the north of the country. That's the aim. And that would be through a combined effort of peace and production, stopping the conflict, getting people back on their farms, and then boosting productivity and getting the agro-industry going again.
What is from your finding, what would you say has helped to make the food, you said the price has stabilized.
Yeah.
What would you say has helped in that regard?
Well, you have to ask what are the drivers of the price inflation?
Okay.
And everybody agreed that I speak with,
yes,
everybody agreed with the reform announcement of President Tinubu, which was about ending the fuel subsidy,
yes,
and working to balance the exchange rates. And President Tinubu was also very aware that this could spike food prices because he announced a state of emergency a couple of months after he announced the reform package. This was good leadership. He was ahead of his time in terms of that announcement. Now, what happened, though, was the exchange rate spiked.
yes,
It went from, let's say, 500 naira to the dollar around the time of the announcement of the reforms, up to almost 2,000 when it was at its peak. And now it is stabilized at around 1,600 range. So that's one of the reasons food prices have stabilized, because the exchange rate has stabilized.
Okay.
Also, the effects of the taking away the fuel subsidy have now more or less compensated on the market. And that has been one of the reasons the prices have stabilized but have not dropped, because the costs now are higher than they were, obviously, when there was a fuel subsidy in place.
So we it's not so much as that we've seen an increase in productivity.
Well, There's been some increase, not enough. Certainly in northern states, our findings are there needs to be conditions for farmers to get back on their farms, and then the agro-industry back. And that challenge is still there. There's also been excessive flooding.
Yes.
There's flooding right now in Niger State, which we could talk a little bit about. But last year we had flooding in Borno State, and there is seasonal flooding. There's even been some droughts. So issues of climate change are certainly affecting productivity. So there's been some increase of production, and that is another reason why prices have stabilized. But the opportunity for even further increases in production and getting agricultural markets back up to scale is certainly there, and we're advising that much more can be done along those lines.
Okay, I was looking at the summary of your the report, and it was just especially when you look at the issue of, you mentioned the issue of weather. It says here localized dry spells in June and July, and then flooding in August and September. It was like being whipped from both ends of
that's the unpredictability now of climate. More frequent droughts, more frequent storms related to changing climate. And we're seeing this across sub-Saharan Africa. We're certainly seeing that in Nigeria. So there needs to be measures of disaster management, putting in place measures so that when these somewhat predictable occurrences take place, communities are ready for it. And then there needs to be climate-smart agricultural techniques. There are new seeds coming online, which are more drought-resistant, hybrid seeds, including in Nigeria, where they're shown a lot of promise. We need to look at post-harvest infrastructure. The issues of post-harvest losses is a huge challenge. 40, 50, even 60% for perishable commodities lost after production. So we're certainly recommending small-scale storage and food preservation. That's also climate smart. So this is a new reality for farmers across sub-Saharan Africa and globally. And it's one that I think everybody needs to continue to work on, providing the kind of infrastructure that's climate smart.
Especially when you appreciate the fact that in Nigeria, most farmers, they don't use a lot of mechanized farming, and they depend on their knowledge, passed down knowledge of weather patterns and all that, and then you have this situation on ground.
And they don't tend to use the irrigation either.
Yes.
The large majority of obviously small-scale farmers are relying on subsistence farming techniques, historical farming techniques, and so the efforts to go to scale on irrigation, as well as seeds and fertilizer, and then moving into post-harvest storage and then the markets, the whole food system needs to be approached in a more systematic way because of these increasing constraints that are out there. But I wouldn't be too pessimistic about that. Agriculture in Nigeria can certainly go to scale. And Africa can not only feed itself, it can help feed the world. There's a lot of arable land that is not efficiently utilized across sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm one of the optimists that says, there's a lot that can be done. And although we focus on the humanitarian hotspots as the World Food Program, we also very much are developing our capacity for humanitarian solutions, finding a way to invest not only in feeding people that are displaced or hungry due to conflict or displacement or climate change, but at the same time, for the same people, do as much as we can to help them with a livelihood, with a resilience, with recovery, with a solution. so that we build back production.
Now, I don't know if your studies can made sense of this, because I'm thinking about this now. Some of the places you've talked about are places affected by, like we said, weather, more insecurity. But if you look at the southern part of the country, their own weather pattern is a lot different. Look like two extremes. They have more rainfall down, and then they appear to have less of the security concerns. Are you seeing more productivity from the South in that regard? Especially since you also, part of your work is also to buy from those that produce.
The southern part of the country is less vulnerable from these kind of shocks.
Yes.
Whether it is climate, whether it is conflict, even the economic shocks that people have faced. There's more stability, and there's more diversity in the economy in southern Nigeria. But in terms of productive potential for staple foods, it's that northern belt from Lake Chad across to Sokoto that as well as part of the middle belt, including Benue State, Plateau State, Niger State, that has held the productive potential for the country, and has unfortunately declined because of conflict, because of displacement, and the reform program, which is a short-term hit, which will have a long-term, I think, positive effect. So we did a study with African Development Bank, with IFPRI, an international policy research firm. We went across the northern states to look at the food system, working directly with farmers, with traders, with the private sector, to get real-time information on the ground. Not a theoretical study, a very practical study. How does that food system work, and what is the potential for investment? And that's a really exciting piece of work that will be released later this month, along with our government and private sector partners. I'm spending time with agro-industry here in Nigeria, with key policymakers such as the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, and of course the IFIs. And so this is a new partnership developing, like-minded, private sector-oriented investment community, figuring out how we can combine our strengths. World Food Program, we're in the business of buying food, of transport, in addition to the humanitarian response efforts in the most affected areas. So we feel we have that to offer. AFDB, the IFIs, World Bank, and others with their investment platform in agriculture in the country obviously has a lot to offer. Policy is essential. Agroeconomic policy advice, and the Economic Support Group is focusing a lot on data and the importance of understanding farmers' needs by quantifying the farmers who are out there, and therefore providing a signal to the private sector on consumption and production patterns. And of course, the private sector is essential in terms of creating jobs, and ultimately driving agricultural markets, which is what is needed for agricultural sustainability and growth. And then, of course, the government, and in this case, the military, has a role in terms of driving forward on peace and production. So I think this is doable. The study comes up with some really great advice and recommendations. And I'm inspired by the partnership that's developing for innovative solutions, rather than the traditional, humanitarian aid approach versus a private sector development approach. We want to bring these approaches together, and have teamwork in terms of solutions.
Okay, so one question that jumped at me when I was looking at some of the work you're doing. So here we have food shortage, According to your studies, 31.8 million people are grappling with, I think the term you use is acute food insecurity. And yet at the same time, you're trying to handle the issue of nutrition. How do you balance that when some people don't even have food at all, and you're even finding it difficult to get food to distribute? And then we're now looking at the issue of nutritional value.
Yes.
So how does that work?
Well, the advice and the evidence base that I referred to in terms of a comprehensive study is looking at a food systems approach, and the food system approach does exactly that.
Okay.
It looks at food security and the need for access and availability of food production on the one hand, and then the whole purpose of all that is to increase nutrition status.
Exactly.
Particularly of children. And then how do you do all that? You do it through a teamwork approach involving the private sector, investment, and where there are food systems challenges, humanitarian or development challenges, involve those actors as well, as part of a team, united on solutions. In a practical way, that means don't just give, if you're a humanitarian, don't just give handouts. And everywhere I go in Nigeria, people are saying, listen, handouts are important. You need to provide for hungry people and malnourished children for sure.
Yes.
But isn't there a way we can combine that investment with a solution? So the droughts, for example, right now in Niger State, the floods, in Niger State, the government is doing a lot to bring food as needed to people. That's a big challenge, and we're providing technical support on that while the government meets the needs with their own resources. We're advising rather than a simple distribution of food or cash, help those people to rebuild their communities. They want to get back to their homes once the floodwater recedes, but those homes are damaged. They're flooded out. They're covered in mud and silt. So that needs to be, employment-based. So provide food and cash for employment-based recovery involving the people themselves. The drainage ditches, one of the reasons perhaps there was flooding more than there might have been, is because the drainage ditches need to be cleaned up. Rubbish thrown in ditches, silt clogging ditches. So it's an opportunity to not just give out handouts, but provide people with the means to actually do that cleanup. I've been in this business for 33 years. We used to call it food for work or cash for work. But this is an example of finding humanitarian solutions approach so that people get what they need, but are also working for a solution in self-reliance. Now that concept for Niger State could be adapted across northern Nigeria as part of a durable solutions strategy of resettlement on farms and getting people back to productivity. And we're working very much with the governors in the northern states, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Minister of Agriculture, on thinking through how that approach can be more active, along with the crowding in investment where there are pockets of stability.
How has this whole security situation affected your operations, actually? Because I'm sure getting down there too is not as easy.
Very much so. I mean, it's the reason, the core reason we're here in Nigeria.
Yes.
So one of the responsibilities I have at World Food Program is to manage the United Nations Humanitarian Air Service, UNHAS. I do that closely with the UN resident coordinator who's overall leading the United Nations and therefore UNHAS, but I have the technical management responsibilities for the fleet. We have helicopters based out of Maiduguri. We have a fixed wing flight running from Abuja to Maiduguri and over to Yola. Now that exists because it's inaccessible to drive
Yes.
from Mataguri out to the hubs, Damasak, Ngala, Monguno, Dikwa. There's 7 or 8 hubs that we fly to on a daily basis. It's the humanitarian lifeline for the region because of insecurity on the roads.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue our discussion. We'll be right back. Welcome back from that short break. Let me see if I can catch up where we left the discussion off on the issue of security and how that is affecting work, meeting and reaching people who desperately need help. Now, looking through your report, which looked largely at last year's efforts to address hunger, it appeared insecurity was a major driver. And we had the 31.8 million, I believe.
Yeah.
But now it appears, especially in the Northeast, we have an upsurge in security, which you spoke about and which Governor Zulum has been raising concerns about. Are there fears this could lead to a higher figure?
There's no doubt it could lead to a higher figure, depending on the extent of insecurity. Although much of the effects of insecurity are probably factored in to the already factored into the production equation. But if farmers are not on their farms, if they don't feel safe on their farms, and these groups, don't just push people out of farming. They disrupt it in many ways. There was incidents in Borno State where 20 to 40 farmers were killed in the last few months just because they tried to get to their farming communities. So that again is an issue not just in Borno State, across the north and in the Middle Belt as well. Ultimately, the solution, and we know in the countries that we've been in as World Food Program, there's many countries over the last 10, 20, 30 years that were in these kind of situations, civil conflict, conflict-related displacement, and food insecurity, where the World Food Program is essentially phased out based on a successful transition. Leading to stability, but then we've had a real hand in a solutions approach, livelihoods approach, transitioning people back on farms, giving them the tools, the seeds, the fertilizer, and frankly the payment through food or cash for their work, so that they can get through a harvest, rebuild back their farming communities, and then no need for us, we move on to something else. So that conflict and the resolution of conflict is key to the strategy of economic growth and renewal. And I'm confident that we'll get there. But there are ups and downs, obviously, and right now the insecurity is an increasing concern.
We'll keep looking at that. I really want to understand, looking through my research, it appeared Nigeria is listed as one of the hunger hotspot. For you in Nigeria, how does that affect your planning? Since you're in one of the places where your organization appears to be most needed.
It's a hotspot. Just look at the numbers and the reasons behind the numbers. That's clear.
Yes.
It's also an opportunity for the kind of building back better approach that is on the horizon. So I try to spend my days staying positive, promoting positive energy, while at the same time losing sleep when there's a setback, conflict, a drought, a flood, further displacement. What's important is to have a plan. A plan beats no plan, and evidence behind the plan in terms of the solutions that can be doable. And I believe we've got that in place now. What we need now is action. Within our control, within our assistance, what we can act upon is delivery, and we do that. One of the real highlights of the last year was, I wouldn't want to say a flood was a positive event. It's a tragic event.
Yes.
But the response to the floods in Maiduguri and Borno State involved our office on the front lines, and we were able to get hot meals out to about 70,000 people within 24 hours. This is a remarkable frontline response. Thanks to our team out there, we have about 200 staff out in the field on the front lines every day. This is what they do. Most of them are Nigerian, of course. There is some international technical assistance and leadership, which is important lessons learned from other operations. And we work with Nigerian partners. It's a very localized approach with the government and so on. So that was certainly a highlight. And we're out in the hubs dealing with the insecurity on a daily basis, keeping our eyes and ears open in terms of personal security and those we serve. But also, I'm proud of our people that's out there every day meeting needs in these very challenging conditions.
For a few years now, it appears the world aid response has tightened. It appears to be less going out. How have you coped with that?
Absolutely. I mean, we're in a changing, let's say, donor landscape.
No.
And I've had experience not only in the UN system and the World Food Program, but also working for my home government, Canada, at a senior level in government, foreign affairs, and development with a major foundation. My responsibilities as the managing director for Africa, the Howard Buffett Foundation, and at the African Development Bank as an executive director. So I have a bit of a unique scope on the financial framework and the decisions that are going into it.
Okay.
And I've never seen really what's happening right now in terms of the challenge to the traditional funding mechanisms. Traditional donors are moving away from their foreign assistance platforms and moving more to local security, budgetary needs, and really asking us all to try to do things more efficiently. That's a good thing, to be asked to do things more efficiently. And I think it's, as much as this is a challenge, the changing financial landscape, it's a real opportunity.
Okay.
And in this case, for African-led strategies, here in Nigeria, for Nigerian-led strategies. And that's why I'm here, to support that, to encourage it. And as we said earlier, finding ways to combine the sort of aid architecture and the aid results that are out there, particularly when there's operational success across sectors. Combine that with private sector investment through blended finance, through innovative finance, de-risking investment, and sound government policy. So I think it's those three things that if we can really advance on, can be much more efficient and a better approach in terms of the ultimate goal, which is self-reliance and economic progress, so that everybody has a better life.
That's right.
That's why we're all here.
Truly.
And if we can take this as an opportunity to work together more efficiently and effectively, we'll have taken a challenge and turned it into an opportunity. And that's why I'm really thrilled with the work we've done. And we started it well before these financial challenges. We started a couple of years this idea for humanitarian solutions, for figuring out how to co-invest, particularly in the north, on agro-industry, on markets, and on getting people back on their farms for productivity. We did that with African Development, with IFPRI, with others, the private sector. And so now that's ready to be launched, and I think we're ahead of ourselves in some ways on that. What's important, though, is we put these good ideas into practice. And so that what Nigeria wants, which is investment and growth, everybody's in line with that leadership incentive that's out there.
You mentioned something I think is also key, which I agree with you from what you're saying, the issue of government policies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way, if you want to do a change that will really have impact, government's role cannot be overstated. How do you assess the policies that are coming out specifically for agric and specifically to address the issue of hunger?
Well, what I've noticed in the past couple of years is a shift to a more private sector oriented approach, and I welcome that. I think subsidization is important where it's targeted and gets to the right people in terms of incentivizing production. I think response packages, food distributions, for example, can be important, or cash distributions, and certainly have been important alongside the economic reform package to try to meet the needs of the most vulnerable, partially affected by the reforms in the short term. Hopefully, those reforms are going to help them in the long term. So I think that's been a government policy priority, finding ways to combine all of that. And we're just trying to follow along with government on that. Okay. They're looking at the importance of data in the agricultural sector. Okay. With the support of the Economic Support Group and others, the private sector is really asking for better data. I think that's an important priority. Policy priority for the Ministry of Agriculture, identifying the most needy farmers, and how there can be a private sector driven, market-oriented input distribution network. Not only identifying farmers, but finding a sustainable approach using microcredit, and advances in productivity so that the right farmers, yes, receive seeds and fertilizers at the right time. And that's a logistics challenge, a distribution challenge with agri-dealers and so on. And then with the right techniques and access to their farms, are able to increase their yields and therefore are able to pay back. If there is a subsidized microcredit program, they can pay back based on their yields. And there are partners here in Nigeria. There's one, Babangana, is a private sector oriented input distribution microcredit firm that's doing an important work, getting inputs out to farmers in a sustainable way. There are others.
A lot of times when we talk, we appear to focus on the federal government.
Yeah.
But the state governments do have a large role to play in these efforts. What's been your findings as you work across the country?
No, we work with all levels of government,
Beautiful.
And also the local governments.
Okay.
So that's on a daily basis. In fact, after this meeting, I'll be meeting with the Benue State here in my office today. So that's a constant with the federal, state, and the local governments. I signed an agreement with Governor Zulum not too long ago on the humanitarian solutions platform. His leadership so much trying to find a way forward out of IDP camps into local communities. And so that is moving. That's more than an agreement. We're now helping in pockets of stability in Borno State with farmers getting their livelihoods back. and a package of small-scale irrigation, of input provision, building back farming communities, which could go to scale, especially if we get the private sector engaged as well. So we have a hands-on program, not just technical assistance, but we're counted on for operational expertise in helping to get the job done. Very important as an operational UN agency. But always under the leadership of government and always working with local groups, with Nigerian local groups, civil society, as well as the private sector.
Okay, now you've mentioned the issue of data. And for us in Nigeria is one thing we're always careful about. Where's the data coming from? Because you get a lot of data and you need to be clear. It's speaking to what the needs are. I take your emphasis when you were talking about the real farmers, because sometimes you get people who classify themselves as farmers. And I've come across someone, I was doing an interview, and he said some people are political farmers.
Right.
You understand? So how do you get your data?
Well, we in our own programs, working with our partners, have a very sophisticated biometric system, digitalized biometric system. It's called SCOPE. But we use it for making sure we're identifying the right people who qualify for assistance. And then the biometric system comes into play. They receive vouchers, and we connect it with the National Identity Network. So that's one of the capacity buildings we're doing with government, because they have a challenge of advancing the system of national identity throughout the country. And we're in some of the most remote areas, so we can share data and be part of the same network. That's primarily helpful for the cash distribution network in the country.
Yeah, that's another tricky part, because we've had a lot of issues in Nigeria with the cash transfer is made, who gets it?
It's an important question and observation. It's one thing to have a policy for cash transfers or for agricultural inputs. It's another thing to get it done correctly.
Sure.
And it starts with data and registration, making sure the right people, either qualifying as the lowest income people for cash transfers or verified farmers who really need inputs, are included in the system as priorities. And because there are risks out there for side selling, for ghost beneficiaries, and that's unfortunate in 2025 because the technology exists. And Nigeria is a leader in technology. I don't think I've ever met a Nigerian. Well, I have, but it's hard to find a Nigerian with a mobile phone.
True.
Even in remote areas, there is reasonably good connectivity. And young people are so tech savvy here. So, there have been best practices in the past, even have gone a bit backwards, I think, in terms of systems for identifying farmers and digitalizing it. So that needs to be bring back better. And I know the government, working with the World Bank and ourselves and others, have been looking at the cash transfer system. And it's something that we offer our technical expertise on as much as we can on both the data for farming, but also the data for cash transfers and social protection.
Okay. When you look at your work in Nigeria, what have been some of your major successes?
Well, I came here to Nigeria not by mistake, not just because I was assigned here, and it could have been any other country. I had left the World Food Program and the United Nations system in 2010 and done a number of other things over 13 years. And I was made aware of an opportunity to be a country director in Nigeria. It's a country I'd never lived and worked in, although I'd been across Africa for 33 years. Because when I was with World Food Program, there was no office in Nigeria. We just opened in 2015. In fact, I was Senior Director of Policy and Strategy in Rome before I left, and there were discussions about Nigeria, but the institution didn't go in that direction until 2015. So I came here having met so many Nigerians in leadership positions globally, understanding that Nigeria has the biggest population, potentially the biggest economy. It has been that before. I think it will be there again. And the diversity of excellence. The creative industry based in Lagos, Nollywood and Afrobeat, the net worth individuals, highly successful business people, moving across to Abuja, the excellence in governance, quality people I meet every day here in Abuja, and then going up north, where you also have excellence, but incredible challenge if you're involved in the work I'm working in. So, ask me what's been my experience. The diversity of the country is amazing. The potential of the country is amazing. The work challenge is also as high as I've been involved in anywhere. And there have been some progress. There are some best practices out there. I think coming together with this unique group and working as a team is starting to yield results. The private sector, IFIs, humanitarian development actors.
I say IFIs. What are
international financial institutions like the World Bank and African Development Bank, so financiers.
Yes.
And I had experience in one of my previous jobs in that way. So I think that's uniquely possible here in Nigeria because of the quality across the board of leadership and technical assistance. But nobody should feel good, frankly, about the number of food insecure in the country and the nutrition rates. And I know nobody does. We're all here to try to reverse those trends.
If I was to ask you now, outside systems, outside government, what do you think individuals can do? What would be your advice to the average Nigerians on how to contribute to helping to address the issue of hunger?
So I've been in dialogue with the creative industry, actors, actresses, producers, musicians, with private sector leaders, with policymakers, with government leaders, at all levels, in private sector, and people themselves, especially young people. And one of the ideas or initiatives that's come up is a zero hunger movement, a movement where everybody can get involved, and using the sort of technical capacity in the country, mobile phone networks. In the World Food Program, we have something called Share the Meal. We've put that forward here in Nigeria. It's an app. And when there's an appeal for Nigeria, anybody in Nigeria can contribute on their phone. 100 naira, 1,000 naira, 10,000 naira. And it's been extremely successful. We've raised over $1 million through Share the Meal for Nigeria.
Within Nigeria?
Within Nigeria, as well as the Nigeria diaspora.
Diaspora.
Contributing internationally, and others as well, who, for whatever reason, are generous enough with their resources to respond to a Share the Meal campaign. And then local financing, including high net individuals, private sector, government contributions on targeted food assistance, zero hunger solutions. And then the international community, people like ourselves, just come in and supplement. We follow this African-led movement. We can be part of it, but it's very African-led. It's an African narrative, and it responds to your earlier challenge about what do you do with reduced funding. Well, you change the narrative, and you change the ability of Africa to meet its own needs, which they can do, and they've always been doing. And you add international assistance as a supplement, but no longer as a driver where it has been a driver
Yes.
in the past.
Thank you so much, David. It's been very interesting listening to you. And I think I leave with your optimism
All right.
about the future.
Thanks very much,
Thanks
Lana.
for
Good to
being
see
here.
you. All right, cheers.
So much to consider there. And as our guest said, we have to remain optimistic, believing that we can turn back the tide and reach millions who face the threat of hunger daily. A quote I came across says, "Hunger is something nobody should struggle with." And I agree. I'd like to get your reactions, your views. You can reach out through our social media handles and the email address here on the screen. Let's hear from you. Well, on this note, I'll say thanks for spending your time with us. Good night.